Section 5.4, factoring. Now there's three types of factoring we're going to talk about today. The GCF, grouping, and the X method. Okay, so GCF stands for the greatest common factor. Okay, the greatest common factor. Now, if we had a polynomial, let's say, for example, 6x squared plus 4x minus 2, the greatest common factor between these three terms is a 2. This is a 2 times 3, and then obviously x times x. This is 2 times 2 times x, and this is 2. So if we factored out the 2, if we took the 2 out, that's common, put it on the outside and opened up our parentheses, we would have what's left over in the middle, and that's a 2 times 1. And our signs would stay the same. So here we had 3x squared plus 2x minus 1. 2 is our greatest common factor, and this is what's left over. We do the greatest common factor all the time, before we even group and before we do the X method. It'll make it much easier in the beginning. Let's do another example of GCF where we actually have a polynomial that, or a variable that factors out. So let's say we had 2x to the third y minus 4x squared plus 6xy. Now we have kind of the same numbers that we did up here, but in this case we also can take out a variable. Each of these has an x, and each of these has a 2 in common. So we're going to take a 2x out, which leaves us with x squared y minus 2x plus 3y. 2x in that case was the greatest common factor. Now grouping is when we have 4 terms. Okay, 4 terms. And grouping means we group the 4 terms in groups of 2. We have 1 term, 2 terms, 1 term, 2 terms. Okay, so here's an example of that. Let's say we had a cubed minus 4a squared plus 3a minus 12. We have 4 terms to start out with, and we're going to group it right in half. We're going to split them in half. We're going to take the GCF of those two, which happens to be a squared. And if we took a squared out of there, we're left with an a. And if we took our a squared out of there, we're left with a minus 4. And then separately, because we grouped them, we're going to take the greatest common factor out of those two, which happens to be a 3. If we take the 3 out, we're left with our a. We take a 3 out of a 12, we're left with a 4. Now, as you notice, the things that are left inside the parentheses are exactly the same. That always happens. That's a good indication of whether or not we're doing these correctly. Now, when we write our factors, we're looking for something times something else. The stuff that's in the parentheses is common, and then we rewrite the stuff that's on the outside. And we have our answer. We group when there's 4 terms. Now, the X method we use when there's 3 terms. An example of that is, let's say we had 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. Now, when we're factoring things with 3 terms, we have to first do what's called the X method. Then we're going to expand. Then we're going to group. Grouping is over there in the middle column. The X method starts out with an X. And we multiply the first term with the last term. That was 2 times 3. That's how I got 6. And then we're going to write the middle term on the top. We're going to think of 2 numbers to fill in here and here that multiply to get our outer numbers and add to get our inner number. In this case, it's 6 and 1. 6 times 1 is 6, and 6 plus 1 is 7. This is what we're going to expand our middle term to. So we're going to rewrite 2x squared. That was my first term. Nothing happens with that. Nothing happens with my last term. It's still a plus 3. But my middle term, 7x, is going to get split up into 6x plus 1x. And my last step is to group, just like we did in this column here. We split it in half. We take the greatest common factor between 2x squared and 6x, which happens to be 2x, leaving an x plus 3. And in this case, our greatest common factor is a 1, leaving us with x plus 3. Just like we did over here, we're going to write what's in common, x plus 3, and we're going to write what's on the outside, 2x plus 1. That is my factored form.